perhaps the industry should take a breath, step back a bit and think about how to work better and smarter rather than to put so much pressure on all involved in a production.
It would be great to explore a bit further what we think the reasons are for some of the operating cultures and practices that we have in production. Why is it as challenging as it is?
Yeah, I guess, there are a number of factors, but undoubtedly production budgets are always quoted as being part of the challenge, and I guess they are. I sort of feel, in a way, that the industry has sort of got into bad habits, and actually, if you're talking about good work, it's really not necessarily about doing everything at the fastest pace possible, working the longest hours possible. And actually, perhaps the industry should take a breath, step back a bit, and think about how to work better and smarter rather than to put so much pressure on all involved in a production.
Thank you.
I think what we've found sometimes is that production budgets, like Philippa has said, budgets are being more pressured, but rather than taking pages out of the script or changing the actual production, the pressure is being put on crew to deliver something at the same scale, at the same idea that it was originally, but for a lesser budget. And so it's about working faster, working longer, and the pressure really gets on the crew rather than the producers making those changes at the top to change to those circumstances. So schedules get crushed and all of that kind of stuff. So it's.
But we're also seeing that resulting in people leaving the industry, aren't we? So would it be fair to say there's something counterproductive about that approach?
Absolutely. I mean, we're certainly seeing it in crews where, we've got electricians who are kind of tired of being yelled at for 10 hours a day, and they can go and wire some houses and get home at 3 o'clock and have a nice life, actually.
Yeah.
And it's not the same kind of pressure. So we're certainly seeing that in crews, and the pandemic had a lot to do with it as well, I think, that people have kind of done a bit of a reassessment and looking at what they want to do. And while we saw a transfer of people from live events and theatre into the screen sector, we also saw an exodus of people who had been, veterans of the screen sector and had been around for a long time.
Yeah. Agnès, do you want to comment on
so I was thinking about also job insecurity.
Yeah.
It's different when you work every day at the same office and you come back every day. Then you have a very short film. Films are all prototypes, and so people get to accept things they wouldn't accept if they were working always with the same employers. And also, we have very small companies with no human resources department, so that's how also it's so challenging, I think.
I think you're right about the human resources often, because each film is a startup often, and there aren't human resources sometimes, especially for smaller independent projects. And the expectation is that heads of department will mentor, will train. Nobody's trained them to do that kind of work. They've kind of got great craft skills, but not necessarily have that human resources function.
Yeah.
And that can be challenging. Even though they ought to know what their rights and responsibilities are, that may not always be the case. So kind of how do we provide resources so that people feel supported and know what needs to be done?
And so improving access to HR support, guidance, and understanding certain rules around compliance could be a really positive solution to helping those small organisations. Just building on that, it would be good to hear more about the interventions that are already being implemented in your respective nations, or our network, same nation, to improve working practices. Agnès, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I can tell you about what we implemented to fight against sexual harassment and gender-based violence here in France. The Ministry of Culture in 2019 decided we have to make conditions, to implement conditions on all our subsidies at the CNC. to certain obligations. That was respecting the labor law on that range. That sounds easy, but still. And there's you have to follow a mandatory training program. The idea is quite the same, in fact, because employers in the sector, they know how to make a film, but they might not know everything about labor law. So the idea is so that everyone was on the same base, on the same page. We built this training program that is really mandatory. You can have subsidies unless you go to this training program. It's a training program that we funded by the CNC. It's free for the employers. It's for business managers only. The one who's responsible for this subject, for the matter, the one who would go to court eventually. And it's specific to their environment. It's we built two, one for the cinema exhibitors and one for the producers, because the risks are different in those industries. It's legal training. It has nothing to do with moral or ethics. It's really only legal. And the trainers, they are all lawyers. That's quite important to say, because that's what people were saying before, that we wanted to go on the moral base. Absolutely not. And today we can see that we have trained 6,000 people, 6,000 employers, in fact. And now we go even further, because we wanted to widen, to amplify these measures. And now it will be mandatory for all still for the employers, but to have their employees follow a training program in two times, one on online, and the other one is on the screen shooting, 2 hours and a half both. Otherwise, they won't be able to get the subsidies. So then the idea is that the wider the law is known, we hope we have less sexual harassment.
So are you seeing a positive shift from those who have been trained already? Has it, what's the more immediate difference that training has made? What have you seen from that?
Well, it's very difficult to know, because it's not because you have more cases that it doesn't work. In fact, you're freeing the voices, so that's why. But the difference is that people say, "I've learned a lot," and that's what I'm gonna do. And also, we work all the sector is working together. There were collective agreements on that subject signed this morning, because we have very strong trade unions that are working a lot on the subjects too. So that's very important to say that all the industry working together, not only the CNC.
Yeah. And Grainne, you spoke at the start about some of the interventions that are happening in Australia, but do you want to expand further on those?
Sure, thanks. There's a Screen Industry Code of Practice, which sounds like it's quite like what Agnès has talked about, but it's not mandatory. It is a voluntary thing, and that's provided by Screen Producers Australia. So again, it's for employers to help them to understand, really, to try and create consistency across workplaces. Some commissioning platforms and screen agencies require producers to complete that before they get funding or get greenlit. There have been a number of changes to legislation, though, as well, which is really what's going to change the game, because that is mandatory. So in 2022, there's an amendment to the Sex Discrimination Act requiring employers to eliminate or reduce sexual discrimination within the workplace. 2023, amendments to the Work Health Safety Act, and this was towards the end of last year, which puts a positive obligation on employers to provide a safe workplace, including psychosafety. And that's going to be the game changer, because that also plays into the kind of the bullying, the harassment aspect as well. So that positive obligation isn't about just dealing with it when it comes up, but actually being making sure that it's provided all the way through and dealing with things before they happen.
And you're talking about legislation there that is pan-economy, isn't it? It's not specific to Screen, but...
No, it's all workplaces,
yeah. which is really important.
Yeah.
But how do you help make sure that the screen sector is across that legislation and understands it? Because, as we touched on earlier, sometimes the lack of access to HR support means people just don't know.
Yeah. I think it goes back to the employer. It's like Agnès was saying, it's about making sure that they're aware of what their responsibilities are, especially under this legislation, because, as she said, they'll end up in court if they don't comply with this legislation. And earlier this year, there was another piece of legislation brought in about the right to disconnect, which I think you already have in France, about people, you don't need to answer the phone or do your emails outside of work hours. And so that's been brought in now as well.